American political culture. One of the things you have to consider when you look at a government is not only its history, not only its founding documents, its constitutional order, but you've got to look at the culture of the people, and part of the culture of the people is something the political scientists call political culture. What is it about their political institutions, their political way of life is distinctive? In other words, if we were to transplant the Constitution, which is arguably the most successful form of government in the history of the world when you consider the United States and what it's been able to accomplish. So if we were to plant the Constitution throughout the world, would the Constitution operate the same way in each of these various countries? And the answer is no, it would not. And that is because of the political culture that develops with a country or with a people as part of their history and as part of their way of life. So what is political culture? It is a distinctive and patterned set of beliefs about how political and economic life ought to be carried out. Pretty straightforward, seems, right? So how is it that we think political and economic life ought to be carried out? In other words, there are a number of components to the American political culture. One of these components is that elected officials should just step down after losing elections. When the Founding Fathers created the Constitution, Europe got a hold of a copy of it, and within England they laughed and they said it won't work. And the reason they said it won't work was because this idea that after losing an election, officials would just step down. Nobody does that. Nobody did it at the time. Kings just didn't go away. Kings fought to stay in power. So this idea that a president or a party would just step down after losing an election, to them was just ludicrous. The history of this stepping down. So here in the Constitution, that was the assumption that after a person lost the election, they would just step down. And with the development of political parties, then the answer is really after political parties lost an election, they would just again step down. So what happened? What is the Revolution of 1800? George Washington was, as you know, America's first president. He served for 2 terms. The next election was between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. It was a very close election. Thomas Jefferson lost. John Adams became the 2nd president of the United States. He was a Federalist. Jefferson was an anti-Federalist, or a Jeffersonian Republican, or a Jeffersonian Democrat, however you want to say it. And it was a bitter election. It was very close. These two guys hated each other. They hated each other. Not only that, the next election 4 years later would be between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. This time Jefferson would win. This was in 1800. And what did Adams do after he lost for a 2nd term? He simply stepped down. He stepped down and he went away. He didn't try to raise the army, didn't try to use the army to remain in power. He simply stepped down. And this established the precedent that this is what individuals do when they lose an election. So if you remember the election between George Bush II and Al Gore, Al Gore was a very close election. He thought, Florida's too close, I want a recount. He demands a recount, loses again. He got a little closer. He said, oh, no, there's still problems. Demanded a recount. Got a little closer. Demanded a 3rd recount. It was that point I said to my students, Al Gore will never be president of the United States. He'll never be president of the United States because he is not acting presidential. He just needs to concede defeat and go away, and then he stands a chance to be elected in some other election. But he didn't do that. He just went on and on, cried like a baby, acting non-presidential, and boom, he didn't follow this example of the Revolution of 1800. To give you a better indication as to really what's going on here in the Revolution of 1800 between Adams and Jefferson, how much they hated each other, you would be interested to know that John Adams is on his deathbed. He is dying. He is dying. And what's the last thing you're going to say when you're about to die? You probably give an expression of love to your spouse. But what does John Adams do? This was, by the way, July 4th, 1826. John Adams, instead of telling his wife how much he loves her, says, "I can't believe Thomas Jefferson outlived me." Unbeknownst to John Adams, 2 hours before John Adams died, Jefferson breathed his last breath. He died too 2 hours before. But instead of relishing in the moment with his wife, John Adams just lets bitterness overtake him and takes this tender moment away for the animosity he held for Thomas Jefferson. Despite all that animosity, despite that much hatred, what did he do? He loved his country more. He loved his country more, and we lost the election of 1800. He simply stepped down. And so much so, this becomes known as a revolution. It was a revolution that's what you do in America when you lose an election. You simply step down. So this really has become part of our political culture. It's just what we do. Another component of our political culture is that government should be run through democratic institutions. Obviously, the government is a democracy, but what about all these other things? We have, for instance, right here at Citrus College, there's a United Student Body. What is the United Student Body? It's a way by which the students have an impact on what happens here at Citrus College. You have these United Student Bodies throughout the country at colleges, universities, high schools even. School boards. School boards are a way to run schools democratically. You have oversight committees for the police. Everything in America has this democratic component to it, that we run things through democratic institutions. There you have it. It's just part of our political culture. Political equality. We believe that we are equal politically. Could we say, for instance, well, somebody who has a college education, they have learned more, they have more experience, therefore their judgment is likely better, so let's give them 2 votes instead of 1. We refuse that kind of idea because we are all equal politically. Each person's vote is worth that of another, irrespective of education or what have you. We believe in economic equality? No, we do not. We believe in equality of opportunity, but not inequality of results. In other words, each individual has a responsibility to provide for his or herself to a greater degree than not. Now, granted, this has been changing. There's a difference of opinion right now in America with respect to this. It'll be very interesting to see what happens in this next election with who wins out. This equality view of economics that the Democrats are really pushing, or this equality of opportunity. You look at even you look at what we do with education in this country. It is really a belief that we practice. You've got high schools, you've got continuation high schools, you've got community colleges, you have colleges, you have universities. You have all these second chances for individuals who didn't perform perhaps as well as they could have or should have in high school, to give them that equality of opportunity. You have government programs that help with tuition. All these things designed to give a leg up, not necessarily to give a handout, but to give a leg up. And this has really become part of our political culture. Now, again, as I just said, this has really been under attack more recently. And as I said, it'll be interesting to see what the next election holds. And we'll come back to this idea within this lecture here, but we'll move on from now. So, moving on to the next concept of what is unique about American political culture. We believe in liberty. Liberty being defined as individuals should be able to do whatever they like so long as they hurt no one else. Now, this idea really comes from the mind of John Stuart Mill. It is a problematic definition as to what liberty is or ought to be. You show me you can give me any concept that you think a person ought to have liberty, and I can show you how it hurts someone else. Therefore, it can be infringed upon. So the definition is problematic as to what exactly liberty means. But the idea that we believe in liberty is not problematic. We believe that individuals ought to be free from at least arbitrary restraint from their government. This idea of hurt someone else. For example, the seatbelt law. A number of years ago, a seatbelt law was passed in California, and I think it's been passed now throughout most of the nation, that when you drive, or even a passenger, you've got to wear a seatbelt in the car. If I get into an accident and I kill myself, how does that hurt anyone but me? It doesn't. Oh, wait a second. What if I'm married? What if I'm the breadwinner? Now, my family is in the poverty line, so to speak. Then with government programs, who's hurt? Well, society is hurt because they have to pay for my family. So therein lies part of the problem with liberty. What about your personal sexual rights? Should you be able to do that which harms no one else? So if whether you're attracted to someone of the same sex or you're attracted to someone outside of the bonds of marriage, should you be able to engage in that? It's the same kind of dynamic. If you're attracted to someone of the same sex, you have those people that argue, wait a second, I think that's bad for society, and if we teach our children, if we socialize our children that there's nothing wrong with this behavior, then doesn't that harm society? I.e., there's the hurt. What about the idea that individuals who are in marriage should only have sexual relations with those who are in marriage? Same idea. If somebody has sexual relations outside of marriage, the marriage dissolves because of it. There is harm not only to the spouse who doesn't want it to happen. There is harm to the children. Some of you know that firsthand from having experienced divorce with your parents. And there's the harm. Should that liberty of the individual be allowed? Man, these are tough questions. It's just not as easy as individuals should be able to do whatever they want so long as it harms no one else. How do you define that? How do you define that harm? As you've just seen, it can be defined very broadly. And finally, civic duty. Civic duty is part of our political culture. Civic duty is the idea that people ought to actively participate in the community. This does not necessarily mean just politically. For instance, let's assume that there is a widow next door to you. Should there be, let's assume she's old, let's assume she's 85 years old. Should there be a government program to mow her lawn if she can't afford to mow her lawn? Or should you, as just an ordinary good neighbor, go and mow her lawn? And what civic duty says is you ought to go mow her lawn. And you ought to go mow it for free, not charge her a penny. You ought to just do it out of the goodness of your heart. Think if we had to have a government program to mow this widow's lawn, how much would that cost? You could do it for almost nothing. A little gas and a little time. And isn't that just such a much better place to live? Civic duty. So you take a look at all these things, and all these things comprise what it means to be an American. And I'm not saying they're exclusive, but these are some of the bigger issues with respect to what our political culture means. And we're almost out of time here, and the next question we're going to ask is, does political culture matter? So think about that as you go to the next video.